Hi folks, we're Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about this all-pervasive thing that's going on at the moment, that colonialism is bad, everything has to be decolonized, which is code speak for the influence of white people has to be removed. Now, colonial activity has been going on since people started gathering in sort of urban centres, and whichever race or group of people or tribe was the most cohesive and better organised and or the most advanced technologically, they would colonise the other areas around them and further afield. That's always been so, and really, it was only with the arrival of the nation state, when the idea that there would be a tribe or a race could exist within a homeland, that this idea of colonisation began to wither away. And really, by the sort of the I suppose you could even say from the late 1800s, early 1900s, the idea of colonies, for anything other than geopolitical necessity, the idea of colonies was already on the wane, and Britain was finding that most of its colonies were, not all, but most of its colonies were really a drain on the public purse, and the colonies that were doing okay had become pretty much independent nations anyway, such as Australia and New Zealand and Canada and so on. So the ones that weren't able to economically be self-sustaining, they were the only parts that remained as colonies. And as I say, they were a drain on the public purse. So really, colonialism has been out of favour and just impractical, uneconomical even, for a long time, well over 100 years. Now, you can have regions in the globe and countries that may be dependent on you in some way. You give them favourable trading conditions or circumstances, in the same way that the Soviet Union supported Cuba by buying Cuban sugar at well above market prices to help the Cuban economy and so on. That was often done with barter rather than hard cash. But so colonialism, in the modern sense, has been out of vogue for again over 100 years. So why the obsession with it currently, in the use of the term decolonising? And to even mention the word decolonising seems to bestow upon the person who utters it some halo of infinite virtue. We have to decolonise. Oh, fuck, what a good person. When it's a load of nonsense. I don't know if the people even know what they're talking about. In fact, I'm sure they don't. So let's just have a look at modern colonialism in particular, and just see where we go with that. And again, I want to stress that colonialism, it will always come from either the most advanced technological group and or the one that has the most cohesion. For example, when Islam began excuse me, during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, or following the time rather of the Prophet Muhammad, this gave some unusual social cohesion to those Middle Eastern tribes that were swept up in this Islamic fervour of the day, and still are for that matter. And it gave them unique social cohesion that hitherto hadn't existed. And they weren't necessarily technologically advanced, but that gave them a cohesion, and this allowed them to sweep through a lot of the Middle East and across much of North Africa, not the Saharan or sub-Saharan desert area as they call it, but the northern coastline of the Mediterranean, where Africa joins the Mediterranean. Yeah, excuse me. And so they then went into Spain. Now, because Spain was so fractured at the time, and there were petty little villages at war with each other, and it was a bit of a basket case scenario, and they still hadn't recovered from, if you like, the fall of the Roman Empire and various incursions from Visigoths and all sorts of things. With a relatively small military force, the Islamists crossed the Straits of Gibraltar into southern Spain and really just took over in effect. Again, they brought a cohesion and a solidarity that was totally lacking in the local area. They weren't more technically advanced than the locals or anything like that. Now, some of the Islamic architecture that has been around for quite a while, it wasn't uniquely developed by the Islamists. It had been in the Middle East from the old Persian empires and so on. That was interesting and is cited as a well, look how advanced these Islamists. It wasn't that sort of mathematics and geometry and all that had been around before. So anyway, due to that social cohesion, the Islamists were able to, as I say, colonize those parts of the world. Yet we don't hear about that. Why aren't there screaming denunciations in the colleges and amongst the wokerati denouncing the Islamist colonization and expansion and invasion? And they weren't particularly kind to other faiths, by the way. So there's a lot of large scale murder and all sorts of things going on there. Plenty of raw material for some pink-haired lesbian college student to get all upset about, but yet we don't hear anything about it, and we should. So this went on, and then the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Ottoman Islamist Empire, sort of merging the two, if you like, and they did have their technical advancement. They controlled the Silk Road trading route, which made them artificially rich due to that trade, controlling that trading route. So this is the trading route coming from the Far East, China and India, through the overland route through all those Middle Eastern provinces and into Europe. That was a massive cash cow for the Ottomans, and they certainly did very well out of it. So that Ottoman Turkish Islamic Empire, they conquered much of Europe by I think 1460 or 1470. They pretty much conquered most of Greece, and then over the next 200 years, they proceeded apace to conquer what today is the Balkans, Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Croatia, Hungary, even getting into what today is Crimea, the Black Sea, and around there and through the Caucasus Mountains. They had a very substantial empire at one stage, and that went into decline as soon as they lost the Silk Road, when the European long ocean going vessels were able to bypass that Silk Road and trade directly with China and India and the Far East generally, and that cut out vast revenue sources for the Ottomans, but that didn't stop them entirely. And their cannons were reasonably advanced. They had some interesting developments in siege warfare, such as underground tunneling and blowing up walls and fortifications. So they weren't technologically backward, but they were surpassed as soon as the latter stages of the Renaissance or the scientific age came into Europe. Then the Ottomans fell behind very quickly, and they lost just about all of their empire. And the last vestiges of their empire were lost in 1917, 1918, and where the other Arab areas like Saudi Arabia or today were able to gain independence or partial independence from the Ottomans, often exchanging one sort of master for another, like losing their Ottoman overlords, but then having a European power as the primary control, source of control, but in so doing getting far more independence. So when we look at the development of long ocean going vessels and the science of cannons and the various other technology in metallurgy and map making, cartography, and the list goes on. Once the Western Europeans gained this advantage technologically, which they did, and they had, relative to other places in the world, they had a decent amount of social cohesion. I mean, not perfect and absolute, but relative to others, it was pretty good. So when the West Europeans gained this technological advantage, and again the long ocean going vessels, that decisively tipped the scales. So for the first time, the West Europeans had that technological lead and at least sufficient internal cohesion and continuity to be able to start doing these colonies. Now, in the 1890s, there was one of the British Colonial Office grandees was reflecting on was Britain a massive force for good? This is the British colonies and so on. No, not simply the colonies. The Industrial Revolution, the advances in science and technology. Was Britain a force for good? Now remember, Britain's colonies were primarily areas that were extremely backward technologically. Most of Africa, and Australia and other places, the people were living in the Stone Age. They were 2,000 plus years behind, in fact, more 3,000 plus years behind the technical development and organisational development of the West Europeans. That's a that's a long time. In the case of Australia, it was even more than that. We could be looking at more than 10,000 years behind. So we're talking about Stone Age peoples meeting the most technically advanced peoples on the planet at the time, and so the difference was obviously huge. And the British, in this case, the leading industrial and scientific sort of power, they were bringing all their technology with them, whether it was for primarily their own consumption or not. They still brought their technology with them, and it still benefited the local people. What were these benefits? Well, and this is where this Foreign Office guy is reflecting on the good. Railways, steam technology. Now, these are people that could take 3 months to get from one end of their region to the other, and yet with a train were able to do it in one day. That's this is the sort of differences we're talking about. Steam technology in various areas of say manufacturing, or pumping water out of mines, mine shafts, and 100 other things. Gas lighting or electric lighting, as it came later on. Advanced medicine and science, and again, you look at say that the infant mortality rate in India when the British sort of arrived in force, and then the infant mortality rate after the British had been for a while. Why do you think the Indian population exploded after the British arrived? Why was that? Was it just some sort of sudden magic? Well, because the British were making sure the peasants weren't overtaxed to the same extent they had been, better agricultural methods, more efficient use of the land, better irrigation, all by British technology. But more importantly, or not, as important as other factors, was the use of various medicines and medical technology to reduce the mortality rate. So the population of India exploded. If you look at the increase in population of India as opposed to all other countries, say other Western countries, the population of India increased at something like 50% faster rate than the white countries did when white man's technology was implemented. So, this is the Indian nationalists. They love to say, the British were genocidal maniacs, and they're blah, blah, and Hitler. That's utter and total bullshit. And so the medical technology, not just to India, but medical technology brought to Africa and so on, caused these massive explosions in the local population, which really, the source, if you want to look at the source of overpopulation in Africa, it's Western medical technology has been the primary cause of it. Science generally, education, law. This is interesting. When the British first went to the Indian Brahmins and the apex class in India, and talked about the law and courts and equality before the law and impartial law that would be adjudicated based on facts, the Brahmins were horrified at this. they said to the British, well, this is crazy. We're the superior caste. Well, we don't stand alongside equality with the peasants, whether it be in under the law or anything else. We make up the law as we go on. We decide what the facts should and shouldn't be, and the idea that these peasants should be judged based on the facts is outrageous. They are fucking peasants. Why should they enjoy or equal standing with us under the law? And of course, this was a very much a difference between the British view of law. Not that the British view was perfect, by the way. The lords and the aristocrats still wanted exemptions that they didn't think the peasants should have. But the idea of equality before the law and independent courts and these sort of things was very much part of the British thing. But the Indian and elsewhere, China, could be anywhere around, they thought this was an outrage, and many areas still do today. But these sort of law, this idea of law and contracts and protections under the law and ownership and this sort of thing, it meant the business could prosper in areas where previously it couldn't, because people's rights in property and so on were being protected by the law, and everyone's accountable to the law, not to the whim of some fucking aristocrat. But this was a tough gig for the British to push, and even today the Brahmins have never forgiven the British for pushing that enforcing that equality before the law. Even today they haven't forgiven them. And of course, administrative functions. No area of Stone Age, obviously not, but no area the British went to had an organisational structure as efficient and well organised as the British one. You could say the Chinese Confucian bureaucracy did, but it fell into absolute and utter corruption and became dissolute and was infected with all sorts of petty fiefdoms and loyalties and the like. So the British idea of a public service that served everybody and was apolitical, non-political, that was something that was quite novel at the time. But it makes a huge difference to efficiency and efficient administration of public works and all sorts of things, and also as a good break against corruption. Even today in India, if you want public works done, you have to bribe people, and the gig goes to the government's buddies, and who's giving the government heavies who's employing their children in prestigious jobs, all these sorts of things. It isn't going to the people most efficient. We're actually heading that way in the West as well. The corruption in the government expenditures is as long as you support globalization, then you'll get the gig. If you don't support it, then you won't get the gig. So that corruption is arriving in the West today, but it wasn't, or certainly not to the same extent then. And of course, trade. Now, remember when the British arrived? I'm using the British in as much as they were the most advanced, technically the most advanced outfit at the time. They come to places in Africa, Australia, or New Zealand, or anywhere, anywhere they went, and they would see all these resources that, to an advanced technology, those resources were usable, whether it be iron ore or copper or anything, tin, you name it. Or arable land, fertile land. Now in Africa, or Australia for that matter, but in Africa, the natives wouldn't bother cultivating land because the local tribe would come along and try and steal it. So if you invest in any time and energy in developing something of value or wealth, the guys down the road will come and steal it. So no one bothered investing in tomorrow. Why would you? The resources you have to spend defending it require a lot of discipline and so on. And they organisationally, they're just not structured that way, and weren't when the British arrived. So that land would never have come under cultivation unless for an advanced society such as the West Europeans were at the time. So the Africans were not being displaced. As hey, you farmers that are really productively using this land, we're taking it. That was never how it was, but that's how it's inferred today in the leftist, the pink-haired, green-haired lesbian activists with their nose piercing. That's how they've been taught to believe today, that the Africans or the Australian Aborigines were displaced because they were hot shit farmers and those damn European style. That's bullshit, utter and total bullshit. The land was vacant and unused and was not being cultivated. You could find some rare pockets of cultivation, temporary seasonal cultivation, say in some of the Indian tribes in North America. They would grow squash and things like that. But otherwise, it just didn't exist. So when the Europeans came, they would use these resources that had zero value and zero use to the locals, zero value and use to the locals. And Europeans were able to use those things. Again, it could have been iron ore or fertile farmland, and this created then trade and created employment and all sorts of opportunities for locals that otherwise would never have existed. Now, the argument about the blacks should be able to rule their own country, well, I got no problem with that. But they're far less efficient than the white folks are at running that, which means that the total world supply of food then declines because all these once productive farms are no longer productive. And the list goes on of disbenefits. So this foreign office, this colonial office guy in England was talking about all these things that the Europeans and the British had brought, again, including international commerce, had brought to all these Stone Age parts of the planet. And but it was always going to be the case the most advanced technology, the technological group would do it. And particularly after the late 1700s or even earlier, the British, the cohesion of English society was such that they could undertake these sorts of things, and with maximum cohesion at home. Whereas you look at the other place, India as an example, was being invaded from the north by the Muslims, and otherwise was a basket case of petty fiefdoms. And the English, when they came and they're concerned about the law, the Indians had punishment that if somebody was suspected of a crime, whether they did it or not, it didn't matter, they'd be chained up to the ground and then they'd be trampled to death by elephants. That was one of the punishments. And also the massive infanticide in India and these sorts of things the British try to bring an end to. It's all forgotten now. This idea that the Australian Aborigines, the Indians, the Africans, they all lived this utopian existence of floating on clouds and playing harps and this sort of thing, and we're all little cherubs, and that's bullshit. It was never like that, not even close. And so, were the British a force for good? On the relativity of scale of good and bad, then yes, overwhelmingly so. As indeed were others. I mean, if you're going to be colonised by any West European nation, during that sort of modern colonial era, then you'd want it to be the British if you had a choice. And so. Was it a force for good? As you look at the relative scale of good and evil, then yes, it was. And again, these advances in all sorts of technology made a huge difference to those places. There's a rail line that runs north-south, the whole length of Africa, for example. That would never have existed if it wasn't for white man's technology. You've been with Tassos today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.